honestly, who would want that dressing room? Look at that group of players. Listen, I watched the game. I spoke to Steve last week, and, the conversation between he and I in the whole will remain private. But my overriding message was to him to be strong and definite in his views. He doesn't need that from me. He's got his own mindset. But I looked at the game. I looked at that group of players, and I was shocked. I don't watch enough of Newcastle. Newcastle fans will recant that regularly when anyone has the audacity to compromise or contradict what their view is. But that group of players are as poor a group of players as I've seen in a Premier League type team for some time. I listened to Gary Neville before the game, building the setup and comparing and contrasting the obvious and consistent comparison between Rafa Benitez and Steve Bruce, and driving a bus through a lot of the sentiments of how different Benitez's team was to Bruce's when the statistics are virtually mirroring one another. And then I sat there thinking, OK, let's see the reaction. What I saw was a group of players that are simply, utterly, doesn't matter who you put in there, not good enough. Joe Linton, I know he's playing out of position, not good enough. Under-aroused, not interested. Darlow, as a goalkeeper, every ball in the first half kicked it out to their players. First goal, down to Darlow. I look at the fullbacks, look at Craith, look at Jamal Lewis. They talk about, you've got to develop these players. These players aren't good enough. They're not big enough. They're not strong enough. They don't take any responsibility. The first goal, John Joe Shelby, the ball player, they score their first goal because he takes a bloody corner and hits it to the first player in Arsenal's box. So Newcastle are so stupid, they advance up the pitch to be able to attack Arsenal because they haven't done any of that in the first half. And the first time they get a corner, the first thing that happens is Arsenal go and score a goal. I looked at that performance and thought, this group of players on whole are a disgrace.
But who's in charge of them?
And then I move on to Steve and say, OK, what are you doing with this group of players? Because as a manager, it's your responsibility to develop them. Now, I look at it and say, Steve made an observation and said that I'm going to do it my way.
Yeah.
And in part, people say, well, what the hell have you been doing for the last 18 months? Now, it looks like a stolt defence, a defence of Steve, but I look at it and say, what could you do with this group of players? You can make them better, but eventually they're going to find their level, and their level is where they are now. If you open this team up and you play the way the fans want them to play, you're going to get smashed to smithereens because these players aren't good enough to play expansive football. These players aren't energetic enough. They're not fit enough in their minds. And to some extent, that is as much the responsibility as the players themselves as it is the manager. If I'm Steve Bruce, I wouldn't want to manage this football club. I wouldn't want to manage for some of these fans. I wouldn't want to work for this owner because I have not been given the tools to be able to do a job. And I'm an owner, a former owner. So I come from an owner's mentality. This group of players are not good enough. They're not good enough mentally. They're not good enough physically. They're not fit for purpose.
So what is Steve Bruce? If you're Steve Bruce, what do you do?
I think you've got to be honest. I think you've got to turn around and say, when you turn around and say that, I've been doing it other people's way, you've got to turn around and say the reasons why I've been doing it other people's way is because if I play a certain way, I'm going to expose the players, I'm going to expose the owner to the reality of what we really, really are, is that we are a mile off. And they can bring Benitez in. The notion that Benitez he's a very, very good manager, and the coup that they got to get him to Newcastle was fabulous.
Yeah.
But the job that he did at Newcastle, the main reason that Newcastle fans, and they'll go apoplectic and I really don't care, is the main reason that the Newcastle fans hold Benitez in such esteem is because he went against Ashley. He played the narrative of going against Ashley, and that afforded him the opportunity to be held in such high regard. Yes, he's an excellent manager, but his statistics, Gary Neville laid it out, and very rarely do I, am I a chorus boy for Gary Neville, laid out the statistics as they really are. That football club is toxic, and a large proportion of that is down to Mike Ashley, also to segments of the fans, and to the reality of what this team really is. They have no right to have expectations. They get absolutely outraged when people like me say they have expectations, and apparently they don't. Yet everybody in football knows they have expectations. Even their former owners that I used to live next door to and speak to regularly know they have expectations. But when people like me say it, you're a Burke, Jordan, you don't know what you're talking about, you don't watch us. What I watched last night, if I was a Newcastle fan, I'd be horrified. They were absolutely appalling. And by the way, so were Arsenal.
I'll run through it. Not good enough, or he gets a pass. Darlow.
Oh, well, I think he made a wonderful save in the second half, but his distribution in the first half, every time he got the ball, kicked it to them. The first goal was down to him.
Jamal Lewis.
Weak. He takes a throw in. First thing he does is look around for 30 seconds and throws it to an Arsenal player.
Kieran Clark.
Poor.
Jamal Lascelles.
Not bad.
Kraft.
Poor.
Joe Linton.
bleeding useless.
Matty Longstaff.
Not bad.
Almiron.
Much of a muchness.
Shelby.
Pathetic.
Callum Wilson.
Not in the game.
Andy Carroll.
Waste of time. I'm not trying. People are saying you're defending your mate. Listen, I had a massive fight with Steve Bruce. He betrayed me. He left me and left to go to Birmingham. Didn't speak to him for 4 years. He is a very decent football manager, but you cannot polish a turd. These players are not good enough, and you can insulate them and you can protect them, but they're not good enough. And he has to be more honest with his owner and say, this group of players are not good enough for this football club.
And once he says that, does he walk or does he stay?
Well, then he takes the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. He takes the consequences of perhaps having the courage of his convictions to tell his owner that this is not good enough. I can't work with this. You can't. How can you work with Joe Linton? Yeah, okay, you played out of position. So what? People have played out of position all the time. But the application, the commitment to the task, the desire, yes, of course, it's in part the responsibility of the manager to embody that. But you can't make a deaf person hear. These people are beyond... I think they're beyond the pale. They are pathetic.
Can I, with your permission, head into this break and suggest that with these players that Bruce has got at his disposal, they're on a road to nowhere?
Listen, I think that, I don't think they'll get relegated. I think there's enough there because they've got a decent setup with a manager.
But it's time for a clear out.
I think it's a clear out.
It's time for a clear out, says Simon this morning at Newcastle United. And you're saying the manager can carry on. Life can carry on for Steve Bruce for the time being.
I think I'm going to contradict myself here. I think these players will get in the sack.